Like most guys growing up in the 2000s, I had a pretty big World War II phase. It was hard not to between Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers and Medal of Honor. Steven Spielberg unleashed a media tsunami onto the masses, and I was right there lapping it up and asking for seconds. And to be honest, it was all of those video games and those movies and TV shows that got me interested in studying history as a whole, to the point where I was like a coin flip away from choosing it as my major in college. And I think for a lot of people my age who enjoy studying history now, cut their teeth on World War II due to just the sheer amount of media representation that it had, before settling into their niche, whether that be medieval England or ancient Rome, or wherever your historical interests lie. For me, I started to change gears away from World War II when I was 17 years old, and I had to read All Quiet on the Western Front for my English class. Man, I fell in love with that book. Okay, well, love isn't the right word there. It's a horrific and tragic novel, but it really left a big impression on me. But I was disappointed to find out that the only film adaptations of the book were decades old, which, to be clear, is a very dumb thing to be upset about, but I was a teenager, so I didn't want to watch any movie that came out before, like, 1995. I wanted a modern, high-budget film set during the Great War, yet the only quality World War I films that I could find at the time were as old as my parents. And in the realm of gaming, which was and still is my biggest hobby, there was no shortage of World War II games, but there were next to no World War I titles. So at the time, I remember rationalizing this as a combination of things. The first is that trench warfare is a difficult thing to make into a balanced gameplay experience. I mean, when you think about it in gaming terms, trench warfare is kind of just like camping on steroids. Then there's the problem of weapon variety, which you would be limited to almost exclusively bolt-action rifles. And then this might be the biggest issue of all, which is that World War I lacks that sort of simple moral paradigm that World War II has. By that I mean, as a player, you can mow down hundreds or thousands of Nazis in a World War II game without feeling bad at all, right? But who do you make a villain in a World War I game? Sure, the Central Powers were technically the aggressors, but in the modern day, we accept that Central or Allied, the average foot soldier in this horrific war, were all victims, forced to endure hell on earth and commit atrocity against their fellow man just to survive.
Didn't want to kill you. But you jumped in here like that. What would you have done?
So how do you handle crafting a game in this setting without demonizing one side? Well, teenage Zach didn't have the answer, and so I sort of resigned myself to the assumption that World War I would always be overshadowed in the world of media representation by its younger, more popular brother. And then in less than like a decade of having that thought, we got like Amnesia the Bunker, we got Battlefield 1, we got 1917, we got that Peter Jackson documentary, we got World War I cape shit, and World War I dumb action schlock. So yeah, thankfully I was way off. And when it comes to that moral dilemma that I was talking about with video games, it turns out the answer is to make the antagonist a manifestation of the conflict itself. Or just make it a multiplayer game, that works too. So let's get into the games. This is one of those games that completely slipped under my radar. I just stumbled upon it during a Steam sale, and I don't think I've ever bought something so quick just because it appealed to me on so many personal levels. Ad Infinitum came out in 2023 and is what I can only really describe as an Amnesia clone. I don't know if Amnesia or Penumbra were the first games to have this sort of click and drag control scheme for opening doors, but any horror game that has that control scheme, you kind of know what you're in for, right? Which I should address the elephant in the room. Yes, this is an Amnesia-like, and it is set during the Great War, but it's not copying frictional games that closely. since it actually came out within a few months of Amnesia: The Bunker. So while the gameplay is derivative of Amnesia, the shared setting is completely coincidental. The game tricks you in the beginning because you start as a German soldier who's given orders to go over the top, and you're immediately given a rifle and taught how to use it. So I thought this might be more of a Resident Evil style horror game than a walking simulator, one where you can actually defend yourself, only for your weapon to be taken away immediately, like before you even see an enemy. So this game switches back and forth between your family's creepy 19th century manor that's a little different every time you come back to it, and these surreal, hallucinative versions of the trenches on the Western Front. Now, given how little I'd heard about this game, I was kind of expecting it to be bad. I don't know how else to put it. I was kind of expecting like a lower budget Amnesia wannabe. And while it is still a little rough around the edges, and the gameplay isn't anything to write home about, I actually don't think I've been this invested in a narrative since, like, Red Dead 2.
Stop in here! What are you waiting for? Ah! No!
In fact, without going into spoilers, I think this game tackles the themes of All Quiet on the Western Front better than the 2022 film did. It's a story of disillusionment, generational trauma, and survivor's guilt, and it explores these ideas in such a poignant, but more importantly, respectful way. You play as a German soldier named Paul von Schmidt. Your grandfather was this great general that served in Germany's colonies in West Africa, and he impressed those values of nationalism and wartime valor onto his son, your father. But your father became physically disabled and was unable to serve in the military, and as he wallows in his own self-pity for not being able to live up to his father's expectations, he presses those grand military aspirations onto you and your older brother, Johannes. But Johannes doesn't want to fight. See, Johannes is an artist and an animal lover, and he's. Whoa, Johannes, your paintings are getting a little spicy.
Nothing happened, did it, Johannes? Tell him. Christian?
You've got no idea who I am.
Paul did the right thing telling us what you were doing up here. Look at you, a pair of filthy strumpets! You repulse me, the pair of you! Get out! Get out of my house!
Alright. Yeah, a gay character. In my World War I game? What is this? No, wait, what is... Yeah, a gay character. In my World War I game? More like World War Woke. What makes this story uniquely interesting, in my opinion, is that Paul, your character, he's not a good person. You suck up to your father, you treat your brother as an outcast for his sexuality, and you ignore his letters from the front. And as soon as you're of age, you also enlist to join the war, all just to make, old Pappy and Grandpappy proud. Your father uses the family name and the clout that your grandfather earned to land you in the rank of lieutenant, which is not me having a stroke trying to pronounce lieutenant, or lieutenant if you're from the UK. It's just the German word for the rank, and for some reason even in the English voice acting they still use the German pronunciation, so. But from what you gather from reading the letters of the men that are serving under you, you're not a good leader. In fact, you're straight up incompetent. And it's all of these insecurities and troubled relationships mixed with some good old-fashioned shell shock and survivor's guilt that manifest into the very creatures that stalk you throughout the game. Paul is struggling between being the strong, proud soldier that his grandfather wants him to be, and the compassionate son and brother that he knows he should be. There's genuinely so much to unpack here, and I just can't do it without spoiling the game. So I'll leave it at that, but this game really surprised me with just how emotional and gripping the story was, at least to me. But it ain't all perfect. The music and the sound design is incredible about 90% of the time, because there are some points where the music abruptly changes tracks without any sort of fading or mixing. It reminds me of playing Oblivion and having, like, you know, the beautiful ambiance ruined immediately by a jarring cut to combat music because you walk too close to a mud crab. There are other parts too where I just straight up don't know if there was supposed to be sound effects here, and it kind of feels awkward without them, so... Pretty much all of my issues with the sound is more so with the technical side of the sound design, not the actual sound design itself. Because the voice acting is fantastic, and the score is... oh. The gameplay is... well, I mean, it feels like we haven't really moved past the old Amnesia days. Most of the negative reviews for this game refer to it as a walking simulator, and yeah, I mean, it kind of is. There are a handful of sections where you have to avoid enemies, but it probably only amounts to 15% of the game. It's not exactly one of those horror games where you're constantly stalked by, like, an immortal boss throughout the level, you know, like Nemesis or Mr. X. The other 85% of the game is exploration, reading letters and notes, taking in the environmental storytelling, and solving puzzles. At this point, you should probably know whether this is your type of game or not. It's not a terribly long game, and if the story strikes a chord with you in the same way that it did with me, you won't mind the stale gameplay at all. So unless you have a strong aversion to this kind of overdone style of horror game, I would highly recommend Ad Infinitum. This game is probably the most well-known on the list. The chances are you've probably seen people talk about this game, namely about how it died on the vine and was abandoned. But if you don't know, Beyond the Wire is a game developed by Redstone Interactive and published by Offworld Industries, that being the developers and publishers for both Squad and Squad 44, formerly known as Postscriptum. If you don't roll in that gaming circle, Squad is a modern-day tactical multiplayer shooter. It's not quite Arma levels of Milsim, but it's far more realistic than, say, your Red Orchestras. I guess if you don't roll in those gaming circles, you probably don't know what Red Orchestra is either, because that game hasn't really been relevant for a while. Dating myself a little bit there. There's a pretty steep learning curve with these games, and they're pretty much entirely reliant on teamwork. Some of the integral mechanics in these games straight up don't work unless you're working together with your squad mates. Hence the name.
Bro, why are like half the soldiers here black?
Yo, what the
That's
fuck?
what I'm saying, dude. I'm sitting next to
What?
I'm acting you
Bro,
a cheapie.
they're
Fucking
outside.
Squad is immensely popular, and Squad 44 was originally just a World War II conversion mod that became a full-fledged title. And that's where Beyond the Wire comes in, as it was supposed to follow suit and be the World War I equivalent of Squad. Again, same skeleton, same framework, different coat of paint. I bought this game back in early access in October of 2020, and as you can see by my playtime, it was rough. Yeah, I was not impressed in what I saw in those 31 minutes, but I thought, hey, this is Off-World Industries. Give it some time. Squad was in early access for like 5 years before it hit 1.0. So here we are, 5 years later, and boy, alright. Yeah, that's a oof. It's been over 2 years since this game has broken even just 100 concurrent players. Every time I've loaded up this game while making the video, the servers have been a ghost town. Thankfully, there are still servers that are being hosted, like they're online, and you can just load in and play some bot matches. So that's what I'll do. I was immediately blown away by just how beautiful this game is. Charging across these muddy, ruined fields under the cover of night, only for a flare to illuminate my surroundings? This game is genuinely one of the best visual representations of the war I've ever seen in a game. If you've played Squad, or even more so if you played Squad 44, you'll feel right at home with the controls and the aiming here. Just cut me a little slack on the gameplay, I haven't played either of those games in quite a while. The weapons all feel heavy, melee is nice and chunky, and there's great game feel here in general. The sniper scopes are a little wonky though. I'm not sure if it's a graphical setting or what, but distant enemies all have reduced frame rates even when looking down the scope, and the default mouse sensitivity while scoped in is also kind of wonky as hell. You could probably tweak the settings to make it more comfortable, but I didn't really care to, given that this is realistically probably the last time I'm ever going to play this game. But other than the snipers, all of the weapons feel great, and the flamethrower I got to give a shout out to. It's got to be one of the best I've ever used in a game, just in terms of like sheer shock and awe. What does suck is that none of the AI will attempt to revive you, so I had to run back from the spawn after every single death. I tried playing as an officer so I could throw down a spawn point, but you actually need 2 other squad mates near you to help you construct one. And that's squad mates, not just teammates. They actually have to be in your squad, which is a great mechanic that emphasizes teamwork and sticking together and playing as a unit. Just doesn't really work when you don't have a team to play with. And that's, unfortunately, basically a microcosm for my entire experience with Beyond the Wire. I didn't play it in its heyday, as short-lived as that heyday was, so it doesn't feel fair for me to judge the game based on these bot matches where I literally can't even engage with the basic mechanics. With a full team, this game may be incredible. Or it may not be, and that's why I don't have a full team to play with. I just don't know. I can't say I remember much from the, half hour I spent with this game 5 years ago, but I do remember the main factor in me shelving it was the performance. The game ran like garbage on my fairly hefty rig, and was prone to game-breaking bugs and constant crashes to desktop. And from what I could gather from some of the post-mortems of this game, I'm not alone. Another big issue that I gleaned from these post-mortems was that there were a load of balancing issues with the game in the early days. And I think it was mainly a combination of these 2 problems that led to most of the initial early adopters, like myself, to put the game down and just wait until it was in a better state. Problem is, this is a relatively niche genre shooter with a relatively niche setting, so the player count was never that huge to begin with, only hitting a couple thousand at its absolute peak. So when the player count dwindled, it dwindled hard. The game didn't have official servers, so it was relying heavily on the community to host their own, and to make matters worse, it also didn't actually have bots until 2 years after launch. So until bots were introduced, imagine trying to play a multiplayer game balanced for large-scale 100-player matches with just a couple players on each team. It just didn't work. Now imagine paying $35 for a game where you're basically locked to just the offline gun range. The last update for the game was in 2022, although there have been a few hotfixes for the game since then, but at least we have bot matches now, and there is a small group of players that gather on Saturdays at 1:30 Eastern to play, but even then there's never enough players to even fill a server halfway. The price is down to $10 and regularly goes on sale for $2.50, but it's still a hard sell even at that price, since bot matches are such a neutered experience. So would I recommend Beyond the Wire? No, obviously. Not unless it gets resurrected somehow, which isn't outside of the realm of possibility. They did bring Squad 44 back from the brink, but even then, at its darkest hour, Squad 44 still had at least a little bit of a player base. Beyond the Wire just seems completely abandoned, both by the developer and the community. If you made it this far in the video, thank you so much. I love you so much. Oh, you're a good boy or girl or a non-binary person. Please, why did I fucking... What? If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video, and if you're not enjoying this video, tell me to fuck off in the comments. Sure, why not? Drives engagement at least. Please consider supporting me on Kofi. More details about that at the end of the video, but you get a little something for your money. It's not just a straight up donation. So in the midst of making this video, I was actually invited to a playtest for a game called Over the Top. This is a game developed by Flying Squirrel Entertainment, which is a group of developers that I've actually been personally following for 15 years, I think now. You might know them for their Civil War game, Battle Cry of Freedom, but what put them on my radar back in the day was a mod for Mount & Blade Warband called Mount and Musket. It was a multiplayer mod set in the Napoleonic Wars, and it built up a sizable community, one that would actually form clans, or rather regiments, and hold private matches against other regiments in like actual proper line battle formations. As in, like, you all had ranks, and the commanding officer would dish out orders and tell you when to fire and when to reload and when to charge, and if you ever broke rank or disobeyed orders, you would just get kicked from the clan or demoted or something like that.
Second rank, crush. Third rank, present, aim, fire. Front rank, stand up, one's ready. Present, aim, fire. Second rank, stand up.
Yeah, I'm realizing saying that out loud, it's incredibly nerdy. It was probably the lamest thing I've ever done, but I had so much fucking fun doing it. Who cares? Eventually, Mount and Musket, the mod, was christened by Tailworlds and became official DLC for Mount & Blade Warband called just Napoleonic Wars. And I have countless fond memories of playing that game with my friends. Like I said, I was in a few regiments myself back in the day. Shout out to 31E. And I even made a few YouTube videos of me and my friends playing the game back in like 2013 on my old YouTube channel.
God damn it, you circumcised me. So I died.
Battle Cry of Freedom was the spiritual successor to Napoleonic Wars in a lot of ways, and Over the Top is essentially the same sort of iteration, but set in World War I. And I gotta say, man, for an alpha, dude, I'm already sold. Like, this video probably would have come out a week earlier, but that game just kept calling to me like the Green Goblin mask. Oh. It's one of those games where there's just so much chaos and explosions and screaming going on at any given moment, it can be a little overwhelming, but I mean that in the best way possible.
Get ready, lads!
Charge! Get them out!
It's never a dull moment. So this is a class-based game. You have your stock standard riflemen who make up your grunt infantry, and then you got officers who rock pistols and sabers and can use their whistle to buff nearby players for charges, as well as call in artillery and air support. They act as mobile spawn points too, so it's important that they stay alive, because a smart and safe officer can make a huge difference in a flanking maneuver or a defensive position. You got a few more of the typical classes, your anti-tank, snipers, and CQCs, and then a few support roles like the armored class, which is more or less just an infantryman who's dicked out, who's just an infantryman who's dicked out, dude. Which is more or less just an infantryman who's decked out in plate armor and can withstand a lot more damage at the cost of losing the ability to sprint. So, not ideal for charges over no man's land, but if you round a corner and you see one of these guys in your trench slapping his trench club against his palm, oh buddy, it's already over. You're fucked.
NANI?
There's also a heavy gunner who carries anything from a machine gun to a mortar, with the catch being that he actually needs to set up his weapon emplacement before he can use it. But if placed effectively, can shred a wave of attackers all by himself. And then finally, the most important class. And if you've played Napoleonic Wars, you know which one this is. Bagpipe engineers. There are bagpipers though. The absolute backbone of any team is your engineering core. Over the Top features fully malleable terrain, meaning that any class with an E-tool can dig trenches, but engineers can do so more efficiently and then can reinforce those trenches.
These shovelers do some good jobs. I'm gonna tell you right now.
Shovel away.
They'll do the best.
I prefer the term digger, thank you.
They have an entire build menu where they can construct walls and sandbags, periscopes, barbed wire, and most importantly, spawn points. Engineers are infinitely useful, and the kicker is, there's basically no limit on how many you can have on your team. Almost every class other than Rifleman has a restricted number of players, but you can go hog wild with Engineers. And you might as well, since their loadout is almost identical to a Rifleman's, except that you can build shit. Your team does have a set number of build points, so you can't just build a concrete fortress around the objective, but even without build points, you can always dig trench lines to get around the enemy or provide cover for your assault. Playing this game feels like a mesh of Napoleonic Wars, old Battlefront games, and maybe a little bit of Battlefield or Enlisted in terms of how casual it is. Don't get me wrong, it can get pretty sweaty when you're pushing an enemy trench with like 30 seconds left on the clock, but then you also got goofballs building dick-shaped trenches and RPing as Scottish Highlanders.
Have at the Fritz!
As for the downsides, the game runs well and the environments look fine, with the one exception being the snowy map, which I think is going for a fog or blizzard effect, but it doesn't really read that way and it just kind of looks bad and distracting. And the character models all have a kind of Xbox 360 Unreal Engine 3 look to them. It's not something you really notice in the heat of the moment, but when you're customizing your character in the menu, it's pretty noticeable. Which I should point out, there is a healthy amount of customization options for each class, both cosmetically but also in their gear and equipment. I had an absolute blast with the alpha, even when my team was getting their ass blasted. I will definitely be binging this game when the next playtest launches, and I will pray to the gaming gods that this game has a player base that will sustain it well past a 1.0 release. I'm really looking forward to the future of this game.
No step back! Over the top! Advance! Push, guys, push! Push! Attack!
If the title doesn't clue you off, this game takes place during the Battle of a Soviet's Fortress on the Eastern Front. This battle has permeated popular culture because it has a sort of karmic narrative to it, right? The Germans launched this massive barrage of artillery on the fortress, devastating the Russian defenders, only to follow it up with an equally massive payload of chlorine and bromine gases. The already rattled Russian soldiers were now facing down a dense, toxic cloud that was sweeping over their line. This cloud was 5 miles wide and 12.5 miles deep. This gas attack straight up annihilated 3 entire companies, and the surviving companies were whittled down to just a handful of men. The full defending force was reduced from 800 strong to just 100 survivors, almost all of which were incredibly sick from gas poisoning. They didn't get off scot-free. Something I don't think is highlighted enough too when talking about chemical warfare, and you'll see why this is important in a second, but chlorine gas, especially when it's as dense as it was during this attack, will actually corrode metal. Within 15 minutes, you'd start seeing the effects. So the defending Russians were not only coughing up their own liquefied lung lining, but their weapons and equipment were also now falling apart due to the gas, and could easily jam or misfire. So all of that being said, after these bombardments, 7,000 German soldiers waltzed in to take control of the fortress, expecting essentially no resistance, only to be met with a horde of bloodied, crazed, half-dead Russian soldiers emerging from their fortress and charging them, all while vomiting up their own liquefied organs. These survivors of the attack, again, most of which were incredibly sick and functionally had hydrochloric acid actively melting their lungs, still were coherent and brave enough to organize a counterattack, despite being outnumbered 700 to 1. And in a probably unintentional bout of psychological warfare, it actually worked. The sight of the grisly, corpse-like Russian troops covered in blood and charging at them bayonet first was enough to cause mass panic in the German line. The Germans were horrified and retreated, and they were disorganized, stumbling, and getting stuck in their own barbed wire. And it was during their retreat that the Russian artillery batteries saw their opportunity and started shelling the trenches that the Germans were falling back to. And it became a bloodbath. Eventually, the dead men of the Soviets were able to completely expel the Germans from their position. The entire insane gambit worked. And that's why it's been immortalized in music and in media. Which brings us to Haunted: Attack of the Dead Men, a game set during the Battle of a Soviet's Fortress, but plot twist, the game takes Attack of the Dead Men literally. We play as a lone German soldier facing off against a horde of undead Russians in a Soviet's fortress. Now, despite giving you all of that background on the historical side of the battle, this game's a boomer shooter, so there really isn't that much story to it, if at all. So if you're wondering why the Russians are all zombies, don't. They just are. Just accept it. In fact, let Zach from a previous video explain it. And then it just drops you in. It's a classic boomer shooter setup. I don't know where I am or who I am, I just know that I must kill. And it's fun. Thank you, Past Zach. You are very handsome and also cool, and still are and will be in the future, which is now the present. Right? This game probably looks a lot more rough than it plays. It took me a while to get used to the sprites, because I think I'm just used to Doom's sort of short and squat enemies, whereas these sprites are kind of tall and lanky, and it just looked a little bit out of place for a 2.5D shooter at first. But the actual gameplay is great. The shooting feels really good. I was actually surprised, because I didn't think a World War I arsenal would fit well into a boomer shooter, but hey, I'm happy to be wrong. Each weapon has its primary and secondary ability, so you can stab enemies with the rifle bayonet, you can fan the hammer of the revolver, or you can drop down prone to bipod the machine gun. Like any good boomer shooter, it's got its fair share of secrets, which I'm not all that fond of searching for, because it usually just devolves into you hugging every single wall and spamming the interact key. But it also carries the baggage of its genre in another form, that being its level design. Looking through the Steam reviews, it's clear I'm not alone on this one. There are lots of people complaining about getting lost. It does the classic, you need the blue key to go through the blue door thing, and the levels aren't exactly laid out in the most cohesive manner, so I got stuck quite a few times, and it's really a shame because it really does muck up the pacing of an otherwise pretty fantastic little indie shooter. Some of the levels don't even give you a map, you need to find one in the environment, and even then, it's only half complete. That being said, the music is pretty great. It ranges from legally distinct Doom soundtrack to droning ambiance. All depending on the level and its tone. But the music can get a little irritating listening to the song loops go over and over and over while you're spending 20 minutes blindly searching a maze-like map for a key. But at a $12 price point, I'd say give it a shot if you're into boomer shooters. If you're indifferent to the genre though, maybe wait for a sale. Other than my issues with the map design, this is still a pretty solid, small-scale, low-budget shooter with a great aesthetic. It's definitely one of those games that you can pick up on sale and just binge for like a weekend and then just never play again. Okay, this last game is kind of a doozy because I really like it, but I have a little bit of a concern that it won't have enough time to fully cook. Trench Tales is a grimdark fantasy World War I Souls-like third-person action shooter. Yeah, I think that's a fair but very wordy description. If you're a fan of Mike Francina's Trench Crusade setting, this is somewhat close in aesthetic. It's World War I, but with a little Berserk and a pinch of Miyazaki thrown in there. The Dark Souls Miyazaki, not the Totoro guy. Although, the lore of the setting is a bit vague and the details are kind of sparse at the moment, but it takes place in a world called Verdun, not to be confused with Verdun, where the two battling factions have reached what seems to be an almost Valhalla-like stalemate. The world is one of eternal violence and struggle, with the lands being reduced to never-ending systems of winding trenches, pockmarked wastelands, and ruined, bombed-out villages. There's a supernatural and a religious element to the world of Verdun, as the bonfire-esque checkpoints of this game are crude shrines to the unnamed gods of war, using gilded artillery shells as their iconography. And there's also this neutral faction called the Church of the Grey Ashes, who are sworn to impartiality and cannot take sides in the conflict, instead choosing to arm both factions with a seemingly never-ending arsenal of weapons and ammunition. There's a lot to unpack here with the story, but unfortunately, at least in this build, none of it really does get unpacked. And to be honest, it might not ever get unpacked even in the full release. They could follow the narrative philosophy of the Souls games and just leave the lore and the story sort of vague and spread out and kind of meant to be pieced together by the community. Who knows, but the mystery of it all certainly got me hooked. So like I said, this is a third-person shooter with some Souls-like mechanics. You have the aforementioned checkpoint shrines that also act as fast travel points, and you have the classic combat roll as your main evasive move. But this isn't an RPG. There are no stats that you'll be leveling like in Souls games. When you kill enemies, you do collect a currency in the form of ashes, and you do spend those ashes at the various shrines, but your reward is just ammo, grenades, and most importantly, cosmetics. Dude, I gotta say, the drip in this game is off the fucking charts. Like, maybe it's just because I've had an obsession with the gas mask and helmet look ever since, like, I guess Hunk in Resident Evil 2. Like, I actually bought the special edition of Killzone 3 solely for the Hellgas bust. Where is it? Yeah, look at this. Look at that. Come on, man, that's peak character design right there. That's badass. Doesn't get cooler than that. It's funny, I think I played like a grand total of like 3 hours of Killzone 3. I really just wanted that bust and the art book that came with the special edition. It's just something about the eerie, emotionless look of a gas mask and helmet combo. I really don't know what it is specifically though. So the cosmetics in this game are just absolute, oh my god, just absolute peak cinema. Peak drip. I mentioned the Church of the Grey Ashes before, and you'll stumble upon priests from that group throughout the map who act as merchants. They'll sell you ammo and weapon mods, but like I said, I kind of saved all my ashes for some of that grimdark trench swag. The weapon mod system is pretty robust though. Each of the available weapons have a bunch of different mods that you can use to tune them to your playstyle, as well as just a bunch of cosmetic mods. You can find weapon mods from exploring too, and I found that they were actually really evenly dispersed throughout the map. Like, anytime I saw what I thought might be a hidden path or a secret room, it actually was, and it had a weapon mod at the end of it. So it really rewarded exploration and kind of wandering off the beaten path. You're also allotted 2 ability slots that you can swap out at shrines, some of which are supernatural abilities like slowing time, and then others are practical abilities like a kick that ragdolls enemies, or a bayonet stab. The bayonet stab is really satisfying when it works. The lock-on is pretty messy and can lead to some awkward engagements. But when it works and the enemy is skewered onto your bayonet and then you use the kick ability to kick them off, oh man, that's a beautiful little combo there. One of the best parts of this game is the destruction system, and I don't think it's highlighted enough on the Steam page, but once you realize that just about everything short of concrete is destructible, the combat gains a whole new layer. This mounted machine gunner was a pain in my ass anytime I had to pass through this canyon, until I realized he's sitting on top of a rotten wooden platform. The destruction is really great. It's not like Bad Company 2 levels of good where you can knock down entire structures, but just about any wooden or crumbling brick wall or platform can be destroyed with enough firepower. The game is open world with a bunch of points of interest across the map and no real direction for you to explore. There are certain points on the map where you'll hear some radio buzz and you can do a little mini game to tune into the right frequency to find a hidden point of interest, and there is a relatively short main quest line in the game that ends a bit abruptly as you reach the end of the early access build, but there's still plenty to explore in this early slice of the game. So, as much as I enjoyed this game, it still is very much in early access. In fact, they advise content creators to stress that this is an early access game. This is not a complete product. There are placeholders everywhere. There are some small areas that are just straight up gray boxed still, and a lot of the models are not properly textured yet. Enemy voice lines are also comically limited, leading to them repeating the same callouts over and over and over again, which kind of make you go mad. And that all leads to my concern. This game is somehow miraculously developed by a single person. And while what we have here with this early access build is already an amazing feat for a solo dev, I do feel like this game is in need of a lot of polish. The current plan is for the full game to launch around May of 2026, which, while that is still a decent ways away, I just worry that it's not enough time to give this game the polish that it deserves, because even polish aside, this early access build of the game is only 1/3 of the overall promised map. And so with this 1/3 of the map still being incomplete, to me, less than a year of development time left, that just seems overly optimistic. And I really hope that the dev pushes back that release window if the game isn't ready by then. And credit where credit's due, the entire development of this game is super transparent. There are dev blogs and updates posted all the time on the game's Twitter account and Discord, and the developer actually welcomes suggestions too. Maybe I should suggest adding Totoro. Like a grimdark trench Totoro. I had so much faith in this game, I actually bought into the $70 tier of the Kickstarter back in June of 2024, and I don't regret doing so at all. This is very clearly a passion project, and it ticks so many boxes for my personal taste that I'm really excited for this game's future. But it's a cautious excitement. I just really hope that it lives up to its potential, that's all. So, would I recommend Trench Tales in its current state? Yeah, kinda, still. It's unfinished and it's buggy, but if you like this aesthetic and if you enjoy World War I as a setting, which you probably do if you click this video, Trench Tales is pretty fucking great. So, to loop around to the question at the beginning of this video, which is how do you make a World War I game without demonizing one side or the other? Well, we got 3 different answers. Ad Infinitum and Trench Tales both made the antagonists the manifestations of the war itself and the horror that it brings. Beyond the Wire and Over the Top simply went the multiplayer route, which means both sides are playable. And then Haunted, Attack of the Dead Men, made the iconic video game decision to just add zombies. Just make them zombies. It's fine. I had a blast playing these games and trying to find lesser known World War I titles, so if you know of any hidden gems set in the Great War, please let me know. I would love to do a follow-up to this video if it does well. And if it doesn't do well, fuck it, I might still make a sequel anyway, who cares? I know this is a departure from my typical achievement hunting videos, but I just wanted to diversify my channel a little bit and do a little bit something different. I don't want to pigeonhole myself, but that being said, I'm still going right back to achievements after this, and that's gonna be my kind of bread and butter still, for sure. Don't worry about that if that's what you're looking for here. So stay tuned if you prefer the achievement videos. I don't have a Patreon because it just doesn't feel right to take money on a monthly basis, given that I only average like one video a month, if that. So, but if you do want to support me, I really appreciate it. I do have a Kofi. You can do a one-time donation of as low as $1. And if you put a question or a message in that Kofi donation, I will answer it and address it in the following video. Which brings me to my first Kofi donation question that comes from Gavin G. Wiz. He writes, if you go down the retro achievement path for future videos, which I am 110% behind that, what is your relationship with the big mascot platformers of the 2000s? Ratchet and Clank, Jak and Daxter, Sly Cooper, all of them have entries that would be banger nostalgia trips. Thank you so much for your donation, Gavin, and unfortunately this is probably not the answer that you wanted to hear, but I actually don't have a relationship with those games at all. Back during the 6th console generation when these games were taken off, we didn't have a PS2 in my house. My brother had a GameCube and I had an Xbox. We did eventually both chip in, I think, to buy a PS2, but it was so late into the console cycle. I think we bought it because Budokai 3, for whatever reason, didn't come out on the GameCube. It was a PS2 exclusive, so we were such huge DBZ fans that we had to buy a PS2 specifically for that. And I did go back and play some of the classic PlayStation tentpole titles. Like I played through all the God of War games when we got the PS2, but Ratchet and Clank, Jak and Daxter, like those games genuinely have never played a single minute of. I don't even really know what they're about past the fact that they are platformers. But that being said, I have been toying with the idea of making videos covering games that belong to beloved franchises that I have never actually touched. The one I was thinking of was Final Fantasy. Somehow I've went through my 30 years on this earth having never touched a Final Fantasy game, with the one exception being Dirge of Cerberus for some reason. But I have Final Fantasy 13 sitting on my shelf in my 360 collection, and I would love to play it. I would love to give it a try and see what Final Fantasy is all about. You know, and I think that might make for good content to have a fresh perspective and a fresh set of eyes playing a game that is the 13th title in a beloved, long-running franchise. And the same applies to these platformers you mentioned. I've never played them before, so I have no nostalgic attachment, so I can give a much more I don't want to say honest, but unbiased opinion on them, I guess. So yeah, never say never. Derek Pop asks, what's the worst game that you've ever 100%ed? Thank you for your donation, Derek Pop. Worst game that I ever 100%ed was, I have to think about that. Well, so 2 games spring to mind. One is Shell Shock 2, Blood Trails. If you don't know, Shell Shock was a kind of a gritty, dark third-person shooter for the Xbox and PS2. It was set in Vietnam and was, you know, kind of fucked up in a lot of ways. It was very grounded. And then for some reason they decided for Shell Shock 2, I'm sure it was probably a different developer that did it, but Shell Shock 2, they decided to just do Vietnam, but with zombies. Kind of like Haunted Attack of the Dead Men, I guess. They literally just made a Vietnam shooter, and then also there were zombies there in Vietnam, and it is one of the biggest pieces of shit I've ever played. But it is kind of one of those it's so bad it's good games, so I kind of have a soft spot for it. Maybe I'll make a video on it one day. I've already 100%ed it, but I wouldn't mind talking about it because it's just so insane. And then the other game that springs to mind, it isn't so bad it's good, it's just bad, is Escape Dead Island. What a piece of shit, man. I usually try to be pretty positive on this channel and not yuck anyone's yums, because even the trashiest games somebody might love, right? But Escape Dead Island can just, to quote the now universally hated Pirate Software, it can eat my whole ass, dude. I had a couple achievements in that game that just kept glitching too, and I had to do like 3 or 4 total playthroughs to get. And that game is just a slog. It's so bad. Ugh. That's probably the worst. Shell Shock, at least you can 100% that entire game in like 8 hours tops. If you have a question or a message that you want me to feature at the end of the video, my Kofi link's in the description. If you don't have the means to support in that way, a subscription, a comment, a like, all that's more than enough, and I appreciate you even making it to this point in the video. So thank you so much, and if you're still watching at this point, why? Fucking go to bed. Work on that school project that you're putting off, or, you know, put something educational on your second monitor while you're playing WoW, dude. Come on. What are you doing? This is bullshit. This whole video is just a waste of your time, man. Fuck you. I don't know how to end videos.